All right, Dan and Amy, technical difficulties, but I think we've got Elaine Parker from the Job Creators Network Foundation back on the line, the website taxcutswork.com. Elaine, are you with us?
I am. Thank you for having me.
No problem.
Oh.
Thank you.
Take two.
So again, tell us about this bus tour that you're launching in support of the tax cuts and in opposition to any efforts to repeal them.
We are launching the Tax Cuts Work campaign this morning, actually, in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And the purpose of the tour is to educate people on how the tax cuts are working. When this bill was first coming out last year, the Congress was talking about individual and corporate tax tax cuts. And what we were pushing for was not to leave out the 30 million small businesses and the 60 million employees that they employ. And so we pushed really hard to persuade Congress to expand the law and include the Main Street businesses that are out there.
So what is the essence of your tour? What's the premise? You drive into what towns do you go to, and how do you choose those towns?
We are visiting nearly 30 states. We have 50 stops, and we will be thanking members of Congress in those districts for the tax cuts, and we'll be also urging the Democrats to reconsider their promise to repeal tax cuts, because the reality is that small business and middle class should not be a partisan issue.
Yeah, that's coming to Chicago, Geneva, April 29th at Fun International on April 29th at 2 p.m. That's when the tour stops in the Chicagoland area. The impact so far, right after the tax cuts were signed and in the early part of this year, there was a lot of talk about bonuses that were being given by big companies. There's talk, even some recently, like with Kroger, about reinvestments being made by businesses to grow their businesses, to bring on more people, to expand their operations. But it's sort of dissipated a bit, and I just wonder if you can update us a little bit, or you will be updating as part of this tour, about the kind of the rolling impact reduced tax burdens is having on economic growth and entrepreneurship.
Sure. As you mentioned, we have heard a lot of information in the news. More than 5 million people have received raises and bonuses, but every American's getting more money back in their paycheck. And we do want to educate people that the withholding tables have changed, that they are keeping more of their hard-earned money. But there's a lot of people out there who really don't know. The reality is there's about 77 million people out there who are hourly paid employees, and their paychecks change every single week based on their hours, if it's 38 hours or 42 hours. Mm-hmm. And so they don't really know. And we're going to take time in this tour to educate people that these tax cuts are working. We are hearing from our members that they are, our small business members, that they are raising wages, they're paying bonuses, they're hiring more employees, and they're making capital investments in their companies. And that means more jobs for people, and that helps middle class.
Yeah, and speaking of those bonuses, how many companies have doled out bonuses?
The last report I saw was right around 400. So it's an incredible amount, and that's just what you see in the news. The big companies that put out press releases on it. But there's a lot of small companies out there doing the same thing. We have a small business owner who's a member in Florida. He actually makes cookies, cookie maker. He gave all of his employees anywhere from $3,500 to $5,000 a year in a raise. So that's not a one-time payout. That's a consistent raise, forever. So we're hearing a lot of that.
And part of the discussion, I know that you're focused on the tax cuts because that's what Democrats would be focused on repealing were they to gain power in Congress. But as part of the discussion, the regulatory environment as well, it seems like we've talked about it, but it doesn't get the attention that it deserves in terms of how it changes the landscape of doing business, the deregulation efforts made by the Trump administration in his first year.
That is the most untold story out there. When the president was running for office, he pledged to repeal 2 regulations for every 1 new one. And the reality is he has repealed 22 for every new regulation.
Yeah.
And regulations, for the people who don't know, is a huge cost and burden on small businesses because they don't have floors full of lawyers and accountants to help them figure out how to navigate those regulations. So it's a huge cost on them, and it affects jobs, and it affects how they expand their business.
Earlier this spring, maybe back early March. There was some talk, even offhanded talk by the president about tax cuts phase two.
Oh, yeah.
What about that as part of the discussion about not only should we keep the tax cuts that were signed into law in December, we should be talking about what phase two looks like.
We are 100% behind that. We love that the bill got passed last December. We love that small business was included in it. We call it the third class by allowing small business to be included and get the tax deduction. But we think that there could be improvements made to the bill. Nothing is perfect. We just didn't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And there are three things that we'd like to see. We'd like to see the threshold increased on small business, the small business deduction. We'd like to see them eliminate the exclusion of service industries. We'd like to see them increase the deduction and overall make the tax cuts permanent for small business and middle class.
She is Elaine Parker, Job Creators Network Foundation president. Tax Cuts Work nationwide bus tour starts today in Virginia, comes to Chicago, Geneva specifically, Fauna International in Geneva specifically, 2 p.m. on April 29th to meet job creators as well as the organizers of this bus tour and this movement to reduce burdens on small business owner entrepreneurs. Elaine, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Thanks so much.
And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.